I think the biggest myth right now is relates to the financial benefits of the cannabis industry. There are businesses that are successful. There are businesses that are getting ridiculous valuations. There are companies that aren't doing anything that are getting ridiculous valuations. There are companies that are getting bought up left and right, licenses that are getting bought up left and right every single week. So the one thing, and investors, I feel like, treat this industry like any normal industry, and I don't think it is yet. So the biggest misconception so far to me is just the investment opportunities in this industry, just as it pertains to like every other business. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
the approach just needs to be different. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a big thing.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, a serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Will Reed. And today, Will and I are going to be talking about a few different things, including starting a business takes a lot of time, and you start out losing money, so you got to be ambitious in face of adversity. Also talking a little bit about just getting done or setting up healthcare program for the company, never thinking to have to do this, finding out or finding exciting tasks and doing finding excitement and doing new paths. Also a little bit of how you build a brand, particularly in the cannabis industry, and dealing with a controversial product like cannabis, and also understanding customer persona and how you pitch to those individuals. So should be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to. And with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Will.
Thanks. You set me up. I hope I can follow through with all that.
I'm sure you'll do a great job. So
I think so.
well, with that, before we dive into some of the topics at hand, what would be beneficial? So it's to have you introduce yourself. Now, as a reminder to the audience, Will was on the Inventive Journey, which is the sister podcast of this one. So if you want to hear his full journey, definitely encourage you to go and check out Will's episode there. But for those listeners that say, hey, I'm don't have the time, or I'm out running, or I don't, whatever reason, I don't want to, or I don't have an opportunity to go catch that episode. Give me the quick 2 minute version of that introduction. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience just a bit?
It was a dark and stormy night. My parents were in love. You can't blame them. No, we won't go back that far.
That might be going back a little bit too far, but
more than 2 minutes, you think? All right, we'll do the abridged version. Yeah, so Will Reed, I'm the CEO and founder of Cannabis. We're a company based in Vermont, basically a creative and digital agency. Hard stop. So I started the company in 2016-ish. Like that's when I started thinking this was going to be a company. It wasn't called Cannaplanners. The idea wasn't fully fleshed out yet, but the motivation was there. I knew something was there. I just had to kind of tie my laces, as so to speak. So I started in 2016, and at that time, Vermont was ahead of the rest of the country in terms of just the hemp industry. We were farming hemp here in Vermont before the Farm Bill in 2018 or whenever that was.
Mm.
So we were able to kind of flesh out what the company was through what was going on in our backyards with people farming hemp, trying to create brands, trying to figure out how to create a CPG with this thing that was like all of a sudden the hottest thing since sliced bread. So we basically paid our dues selling CBD for companies in Vermont, and then we're able to grow that nationally after the Farm Bill. And then at the start of COVID, when I, like probably every other business owner in the country, thought we were going to go out of business, we shuffled slightly, created a different web product. We build websites. That's primarily what we do. We built, we developed a new web product that we were able to sell gangbusters, right? So, and with doing that, we kind of changed our focus a bit. So we still work with CBD companies, but our main persona right now is, and we'll get into this, it sounds like, within this conversation and how we figured this all out. But we changed our persona model to dispensaries and adult use CPGs. So, retail products. And we've been going strong ever since. So we build the web, sometimes we'll build the brand, we'll do fun stuff like create products or marketing assets or whatever. And then we put those brands, those products online. And then generally we'll do a lot of digital marketing. So create tons of content for that brand. Maybe some Google business stuff, maybe some AdWords, which we're starting to get into this year.
So now I'm going to jump, because now we're going beyond 2 minutes, and you didn't even go back to the dark and stormy night. But we're going to get into a lot of that. So let's go ahead. So
go back to the other podcast. Listen to the other podcast. I'll tell you the whole thing.
Listen to the other podcast. You'll find out all
where the birds, what the birds and the bees are doing. Yeah.
So now, one of the things, and in no particular order, but it's always fun, maybe at least as the attorney
interrupt. Yeah.
Gloves are off, but the attorney in me always likes to, jump to the controversy or the less, the exciting things in the conversation. So, maybe we'll start off there, which is,
let's do it.
One of the things that I think is, interesting about this, area or this industry is it's a controversial product in the sense that depending on whether, politics, we're not getting into politics. That's too controversial for the podcast. But whether it's political views, whether it's religious views, whether it's just personal views, when you're talking about cannabis and this kind of industry, it tends to evoke that controversy as to whether or not it should be a product, whether or not it should be alive, whether or not you should be selling it, and whether it's illegal and not illegal, and whole swath of things. And not to get into feelings on that, but how do you start to navigate if you're in that type of industry? How do you deal with that public persona? How you deal with that as far as building a
such a good question.
Addressing that?
Yeah, this is such a good question. I think it's really specific to the cannabis industry, right? Like a lot of us maybe too flippantly refer to it as coming out of the cannabis closet. Like we really are. Like for the first 2 years this business existed, I didn't really talk about it, and not particularly because I was ashamed. I definitely wasn't. Like I was the opposite. I was proud. But there's a couple things. So one is generally speaking, right? And the other one has to do with the cannabis industry. So let's talk about the generality first. If you're an entrepreneur and you have an idea and you start and I've heard this said by so many people before, do not get input from your family or friends. They're going to convince you not to do something. They're going to convince you why your idea is bad, generally. And most people have supportive families and friends, right? This has nothing to do with that. This is just human nature, right? So the first part of this is until you've cashed your first check, keep it a secret. And I don't keep it a secret. Keep it to yourself, or else you're going to spoil this thing. Once you're self-validated, let the haters come, let the positive energy come, like receive all that. But the criticism are like, what the hell are you doing? You're working in weed? Like those sorts of things will wash right over you. It's amazing. So there's that.
And I'll give you a 50%, which I guess is still really great. But my experience has either been when you're talking with family, they're either way too supportive or they trash you. So sometimes you'll get a family members. It could be the worst idea in the world, but they don't want to hurt your feelings and they just want you to be successful, be supportive. So they'll tell you you're great, or it's a great idea no matter what. And then
and then you think like, oh shit, I think Uncle Dave's actually an idiot. Like, why did he thinks I'm doing the right thing? Like, am I doing the right thing?
Exactly. So I think it's either way, I love the point, which is family members are the worst. Now, it's not, sometimes you might not just, if you have a really trusted family member, maybe they have a lot of business experience and background, you may want to get some mentorship or some
absolutely
guidance. But by and large, if you're just going to going to the family members and say, what do you think about the idea? Usually it's either they're way too supportive and love the idea no matter what it is, or they trash it to no end, and you're going to come out of there either with the wrong idea that I'm going to make billions of dollars with it, or this is never going to work, and neither of them are good points. So I think that's definitely
working in the creative field as I do, and with creative people, and I have my whole life. I will say the thing that just a characteristic trait that creative people and entrepreneurs have, just this thin trait, is self-deprecation, self-doubt, right? Like you talk to any musician, you know, you see my guitar behind me, but like you talk to any musician who writes a song, they'll be like, oh, I don't want to, you know, it's the shittiest song I've ever written. I don't want to show it to you. Or like painters, they're like, I'm not ready to show you my painting yet. It's not ready. Like that's something you hear all the time from creatives. And you might not like hear that exact dialogue from entrepreneurs, but the sentiment still exists. So all I'm saying is like there's this common kind of psychological thing that happens with creative people and entrepreneurs wherein they can be very easily talked out of um, being on a path that may actually be the right path, a path to greatness, like whatever. Like it's really up to that person to finish that song and like put it out there, or like you know put the last period on that business plan and like you know start grinding, you know. But yeah, the second you start getting outside opinions, the second people are going to give them to you.
Absolutely. So I'm right there. Now, I don't think that you should close yourself off from opinions. I
No, no,
still
no,
think that
definitely
they
not.
can be valuable, but you do need to look at the source. So
It's
that's
only
my
yeah, it's something, yeah, you only you can figure it out, right? And then
yep,
the other side of this is the weed side, right? And like
yep.
that, you know, like with that comes maybe that's a little bit of like the shame, and the shame is just a result of the war on drugs. Like really, like you know, you're starting a cannabis company and you might have all those thoughts that you pointed out, Devin, which is like, you know, like is weed a gateway drug? Like you know, I'm cool and I, you know, I don't have a heroin problem, but like, you know, it never led me anywhere I didn't want to go. But is that real? Like, you know, all of these things. But again, that's just fear in your brain being like, you're gonna fail. Right. And now you're doing weed, you're definitely gonna fail. Like you have a dumb business idea and you're applying it to cannabis, you're screwed. And like that's just fear. So for me, um, I kind of kept it to myself a little bit. Like I was going out and hustling the idea and trying to close deals and actually grow, you know, validate and grow the business a little bit.
Mhm.
But really, like I wasn't really seeking too much outside approval. Um, I mean, until I was ready. Like I got my mentors, but those that's a different thing than
Now,
telling strangers or families and friends.
so now let me, or maybe just a follow. So now so you've got the business up and going, or at least got it, in the or further along in the planning stages. But now when you go out and you start to market it, or again, this is, I think there's kind of two sides. It can be ultra specific with the cannabis, but even just a and I can see controversial products, whether it, again, not getting into the politics, but whether it's Black Lives Matter as an entity, whether it's Trump as an entity, whether it's pornography as an industry, whether it's cannabis, and people have, whether it's abortion or religious products, there are a lot of ones that have very strong emotions that get evoked, whether or not they're right or wrong. And I don't know that it matters, but you're going to have to figure out how to deal with those as you're trying to market and bring the product to market just by the nature of the product. And so now as you're trying to go out, and it kind of almost goes into the persona, the customer persona, but how do you figure out when you're dealing with, particularly and more maybe in a bit more generally, the controversial product, how you bring that to market, or how you or market that to hit the right people, but also not worry about the people that are going to not like your product no matter what you do. Kind of how do you figure out how to market it, or target the people that were going to be your customers?
Right. That's a really good question, Devin. I'm sure you know that because all you do is ask good questions. Let me let
I
me
do my best.
let me think. Like, because that is a multifaceted question as well. So I think, and not to be overly flippant, but a big part of it is saying fuck it and being able to believe in yourself. So for me, it was like, okay, like you ever see it's when it happens all the time, and usually it's not for anything more than like something very arbitrary, but like there's times in everybody's lives where something, a decision, a question you need answered seems like the most obvious thing to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And since day one, that was this for me. Like Canna Planners was that. Like I never once considered the the controversial nature, the controversy, to Englishize that word. You know, there's that didn't cross my mind. But the way it did cross my mind was how we would develop our mission statement. So for me, starting Cannabis, so I'll split this in two. For starting Cannaplanners, it was like, I don't fucking care. Like, I know that what I'm doing is the right thing. Like, it's never been more clear. Now, the way that I apply that to how we pitch ourselves to other companies is our mission statement, and that's normalization, right? So what you're talking about, like the perspective that you just stated, and that can be applied to a lot of things. And on the scale, the spectrum of controversy, for sure, things are higher than other things. And for me, only because I, been using it most of my life, can't like I understood cannabis. I knew that it was just bad PR. Like, it's just bad PR. All of those things just have bad PR. Like, that's all it is. So I knew that developing a mission statement that was true to that ideal, but making it marketable, was super important. So normalization is what we set out to do from the get-go. That was always our journey, was like, okay, so maybe cannabis is controversial. It's been illegal for 93 years or whatever. It's still illegal federally. It's popping off statewide everywhere. So somewhat, like, I would say, generally speaking, people understand that this is a good thing, and that the PR was just shit for the last almost 100 years. So when you ultimately need to make the decision for yourself whether or not attaching your business to some controversial thing is what you want to do. Like, that's a personal professional decision, but how you apply those values to what you end up doing is more important, I think. So, like, for me, it was like, yeah, okay, like the green cross, the weed leaf, like all of these stigmas that exist, like, okay, well, that's my job, is I'm going to break all of those with every brand we create. We'll break all of those things, and we do.
No, and I think that that's a great takeaway, and I think that you have to have the fortitude to, first of all, you have to have that personal conviction of, hey, it's going to be a
Is a
controversial
calling.
product.
Like, I
I
never
know it out of
understood
the
that.
chute. It's going to be controversy. There's going to be people that love it. There's going to be people who hate it, and I think you just have to have that wherewithal to say, hey, I'm going to go forward and build what I'm passionate about and what I feel like is what I'm supposed to do. And then you're going to just have to embrace yourself. And I think that there's an element of that even when it's non-controversial products. I mean, you'll get, you're in business long enough, and I'm in IP law, which is pretty non-controversial, and you'll still get people that are those dang attorneys, and they'll talk down about attorneys, and they'll say how they way overcharge and how they're not, and everything on there. Everybody has an attorney joke, and everybody loves to make fun of attorneys, and you're just going to have to say, hey, I understand it. I'm going to try and make our customers happy, and I'm trying to be good customer service, trying to put out a good face and represent our product well, but I can't make everybody happy, and I'm just going to have to deal with that. And I think that, bracing yourself, probably to your point, is the best point, because there isn't a way that you can just simply make the controversy go away. Now, one of the other things that, I have seen is, I think sometimes you can, and you kind of started to allude to it, is you can make that controversy work for you. In other words, sometimes it's with humor, sometimes it's with being a representative, or, or standing up to that, or, otherwise putting your personal stamp on it, or otherwise approaching that. Sometimes you can flip something that's controversial to make it work for you. So I think that that's sometimes another thing to think about as well.
I consider myself very lucky, just given all the variables of the industry I'm in and the business I run. Like, we take ourselves just the right amount of seriously, like, and that's like a hair, so you know what I mean? Like, we're professionals, and we love what we do, and we do what we do very well, but we're creating brands that people use to get stoned, usually, or sometimes medicate, but usually they're recreational products. So, like, you can't take yourself too seriously, if you have that luxury. Like, we're not doctors, and no one is going to get hurt as a result of any of the work we're doing here at Cannaplanners. So obviously, like, we're lucky, but yeah, to your point, we have fun with what we do.
I build on that, because I mean, even now, I don't tend to fit the mold with the typical attorney. I mean, if you're watching the video on here, I'm not wearing a suit, I'm not wearing a tie. I'm wearing a ball cap,
You-
all
Are
which
you wearing pants,
I
Devin?
am wearing
Come on.
pants. We're
All
good to
right.
go on that. Um,
Good.
it's certainly not the
I'm not.
the typical view of an attorney, and yet I look at that and say that's why people hate attorneys. They're so stuffy, they're so old school, they're so people don't feel like they can approach them, and so that was one of the ways that we turned it and said, hey, we're not going to be that conventional attorney because people don't like conventional attorneys. So I think that again, you're almost having to look and say, how can you establish that as part of your brand? Now, one of the things that you hit on, and I think dovetails well into this, is you also talked about customer personas and how it sounded like
Yeah.
there was a bit of an evolution for you. You had to figure those things out a bit in order to hone in on it. So, walk us through a
Hmm.
little bit for those that aren't as familiar with the term. What is a customer persona, and then how do you go about nailing that down?
Yeah. So a customer persona is generally just a very basic summary of the type of person you're usually selling your services to. And that can be there can be multiple types, right? So I'll give you some examples. For us, and if you follow the rules of HubSpot, which is a great resource for anybody trying to figure out how to start a business or make content, or you give them silly names. So let me see if I remember some of them. So there's Farmer Frank, producer Paul, dispensary Dan, marketing Mary, those sorts of things. So like what we're really doing is personifying a type of person that we figured out we've been talking to over the last few years, right? So, if a marketing manager from a brand or a dispensary wants to talk to us about our services, our pitch might be different than if we're talking to a farmer in Vermont who just got their tier 1 license and is able to farm 100, an acre of cannabis outdoors. So those conversations are different, their pain points are different. So what we do is we're like, okay, if we're talking to a dispensary owner, what are we generally saying? What are generally are their pain points? And we'll list them out. It's X, Y, and Z. So when we're having conversations with them, um, we want to kind of steer the conversation in that way. We're not going to talk to them about their issues with cultivating, or we're not going to talk to them about how they're packaging their products. We're going to talk to them about how we're going to help them get more customers into their store, right? So that's how you kind of figure that out. So, and this is I wrote a blog post, Devin. If you'd like, I'll share it with you after, and you can add it to the description of this thing. I wrote a blog post about this the other day,
Mm.
because we run into like we took the time. This took months to figure out who are our personas, and how are we gonna, what are the sales pitches for each. So when we're talking to our clients who come to visit us, who come and want to retain our services, we're asking them some of those questions, and most times they don't know. So in cannabis, the go-to answer when we ask, okay, who's your customer, uh can you guess, Devin, what they might say?
Everyone.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they say. So everyone who smokes weed is my customer. They're all going to come to my store. So you have to put the brakes on that conversation and say, no, that's not true, because uh that's just not how it works. Right? So especially when you're developing the brand, right? So we're asking these questions less to help our clients figure out their sales pitch, although ultimately it is used for that, but rather to figure out a creative direction and maybe a digital marketing direction that we want to help this company take, right? So you can't apply a strategy to a global cannabis consuming population. It's impossible. So you
Mm.
have to go through and figure out. And a lot of this it's really heady and hard to think about, right? And clients almost never think about it, almost ever, but it's really like important to do in order to figure out, okay, like if we're creating, we'll go back to a cultivator. If you're creating a pre-roll product, well, you know you've just closed off a whole section of consumer who maybe only likes an edible, right? So it's about trying to figure, if everybody is your customer, then you have to figure out what verticals in those, you know, verticals, for the risk of being redundant, what products within those verticals are going to, be received by those types of people. So you have to figure it out. And that that helps play out a creative strategy. You know, if we know that a company has a more scientific approach, we're not going to be illustrative in, you know, we're not going to be overly creative in kind of the packaging we create. Meanwhile, if we do have a small kind of, you know, legacy grower who does want to be super creative, we do that too, you know. So but we have to understand who they're trying to sell those products to. And like I said, a lot of times they don't know.
No, and I think that's a good point. And that's why, I was pretty sure I knew the answer, which was who is my customer? Everyone, or,
Yeah.
a large swath of the population. And that was going to be my question to you because, it seems like, even within cannabis, and I fully disclose, I haven't ever done cannabis and I have very little background with it, although we have a decent amount of clients that are in that industry as a but it seems
I
like
always know people are telling the truth when they say something like that by the way they say it. So you just said I've never done cannabis, which I think is hilarious.
I don't even know the right terminology, and
exactly.
I really admit that.
It's adorable, Devin. It's adorable.
So, but I think but we do have a lot of clients who are in that industry, so I have a pretty good familiarity with it. Not necessarily the terminology as far as be it or in the industry. But that was one you hit on, and it seems like you have gummies, you have whether you smoke it, whether you do it as edibles, and whether or not you do it as medical, whether or not it's non-medical, whether it's recreational, and all of those are not in the same market. And yet, almost to your point, sometimes people come in and I'm just going to sell to everybody, and I think that idea is not just specific to your industry; it's specific across the board, which is you have to nail down what is unique. In other words, there's a lot of, in an example of cannabis industry, there's a lot of companies out there that are doing it, and you have to figure out what is your niche or how you're different or who you're going to approach or who you're going to target, and then you have to start from there. And so I think that you hit on that. I think that definitely makes sense and highlights a good point.
Well, let me give you a little bit of inside baseball on it, just so for people listening, because like it can add, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm about to hire a creative agency to do something for me, and maybe I don't know who my persona is. We think about this in a very nerdy yet artistic way. So here's the inside baseball on this is like, before you go hire an agency, because they're going to ask you this question, who are your customers? Personify your business. So what I mean is, your business is no longer a building that you walk into or an idea. It is now a person whose hand you're going to shake, right? Or whose house you're going to go over, right? Cannaplanners, Joe Cannaplanners. I'm going over to his house. Okay, what's his house look like? What happens when you walk in that front door? What kind of art's hanging on his wall? Like, what kind of music is he listening to on the stereo? You know, like, what's he eating? So if you personify the business, which sounds weird, but we do it with our pets all the time, you know, personify your business, give it a name, Joe Cannaplanners, and try to add characteristic, personable attributes to that person, right? And from there, you can figure out, okay, Joe Cannaplanners listening to, you know, Bitches Brew by Miles Davis in the background. He's baking an apple pie, you know, like whatever the answers to those questions are, you can say, okay, well, Joe Cannaplanners, like, is this type of person. So he wants to sell his products to like-minded individuals. So all you've done is you've just figured out who your customer isn't, which is almost more important than figuring out who your customer is, because that populace is way bigger, way bigger. So personify them. Just give them a name. Like, make it up. Just have fun with it.
No, and I think that's a great thing, and it's one that I had to learn along my journey because I originally thought it was kind of the stupid marketing speak, and it was just an example that didn't really matter. And yet now, as you get into it, it does make it more personal and does help to identify who your customers are. Now, I'll caveat it with, sometimes you get in there and you start out and you think you know who your customers are, only to find out as you get further on or further down in the industry, your initial persona of who you think your customers are may not match with reality. It may be that you missed the mark.
That's a success.
Yep.
That's a successful realization, though, because like, you've at least figured out who your customer isn't, and you've probably, by the point you figure out who they are, you've received lots of feedback that you can then develop the brand more from. So like, that's the other thing I'll say is, like, when hiring a creative agency, like, the thing that they give you when your project is done it's never done. And and if you continue personifying your company, like what an agency hands you when the project's over is a screaming newborn baby wrapped in a blanket, right? And you have to raise that baby, and that baby's going to become someone different. In the first 9 months, it's live, like literally, like the company will change within weeks, months, and years, and all you're doing is just perfecting the company. That's all you're doing. So even if you come out of that experience with the wrong persona, it's actually not the wrong persona, because you've gotten feedback from that persona, and now you're able to evolve the brand to, the brand is now a teenager. You can now, like, it can now be that person. So that's,
Absolutely.
I would say that's a successful thing to realize. The worst thing to do is to not be self-aware enough and just continue selling to the same person who doesn't give a shit about your brand.
Nope, I totally agree with you. And I said I think it is, you need to look at it as a success, but it is. In other words, if you're shifting that persona, it means that you're learning more about your customers, you're figuring out the market, and I think almost every company or goes through that. In other words, very
We
seldom,
went
unless
through it.
you're, yeah, we went
We
through it.
went through it.
Everybody went through it. And I think, you have to, unless you are very experienced in your market and you've already been doing it for a number of years, and all you're doing is starting your new business to replicate the business you were previously working for, with the very rare exception, everybody goes through that and everybody evolves. And even if you do that, you usually evolve anyway. And so I think that's a great takeaway. Well, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of all the things that we could be talking about and all the fun areas, and yet we're already hitting towards the end of the podcast. And so we'll have to have you back on and share a little
Part
bit more of
three.
your expertise and your journeys on maybe on one of our sister podcasts in the future. But at least for this episode, as we wrap towards the end of the episode, I always have one question that I'd like to ask, and so we'll jump to that now, which is, within your industry, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
There's so many, Devin. Um, hmm. I think the biggest myth right now is relates to the financial benefits of the cannabis industry. There are businesses that are successful. There are businesses that are getting ridiculous valuations. There are companies that aren't doing anything that are getting ridiculous valuations. There are companies that are getting bought up left and right, licenses that are getting bought up left and right every single week. So the one thing, and investors, I feel like, treat this industry like any normal industry, and I don't think it is yet. So the biggest misconception so far to me is just the investment opportunities in this industry, just as it pertains to like every other business. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
the approach just needs to be different. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a big thing. But I think that's the nature of, do you remember? I mean, pets.com, you know what I mean? Like, this is what happens. Um,
No, and I
there's a
think that the live and real term corollary is the tech industry right now, and they're going through
totally.
it. They're getting hammered. I mean, you see layoffs with Meta, with Twitter, with I was reading about a technology, and I don't know how it's technology furniture company, a lot of others, and they're just having to go out or do big layoffs because they were overvaluated. People had a misperception, and I think that I think that that's a myth that needs to be dispelled. Is just like you said, cannabis industry may be overhyped, or there may be areas and people do meet multipliers that are just crazy. And yet, on the other hand, I think you have to be self-realistic too. If you're planning on if you're trying to just get in to make a quick buck, that usually doesn't work. It's not a good plan. And if you're in it for the long haul, you have to be self-realistic. What is my not what all the crazy evaluations that are out there, but what is the actual industry worth, and how am I going to make a sustainable business? So I think that's a great one to hit on.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would agree. It's definitely treated similarly to how investors treat tech companies. Um, the difference is cannabis isn't as ubiquitous as tech is. Like, not everybody has an iPhone in their pocket, and or wherein everybody has an iPhone in their pocket, not everybody's smoking weed, right? So, and also, until federal legalization happens, and this is a whole other podcast as to whether or not that's a good or bad thing. Like, there's no cross-state commerce. So, like, while MSOs exists and brands like cookies exist, there's only one cookies, right? So, it's not like cookies are selling their products in 50 states, are shipping across states, are shipping globally, right? So there's all these factors that just don't exist. It's like, you have to be content with medium to slightly large scale businesses, of course, unless you're like Dutchy or something like that. Like, yeah, so it's amazing to watch. It's just, it's spectacular to observe, but yeah, people are treating it like tech.
Yep. No, I think I definitely agree. So I think it's a great myth to dispel. So, well, now as we wrap up towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, we're on all the things. So Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all at Cannaplanners, cannaplanners.com. For some reason, we couldn't get at Cannaplanners for Facebook, so we're at 420 Web. And apologies to the company called 420 Web. If you're watching, you can have it. I don't care. Take it. So yeah, just Google Cannaplanners, you'll find us. I am very active on LinkedIn, so I'm sure Devin will tag me in LinkedIn when he posts this. So yeah, give me a follow. You can reach out to me there.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to connect up with you on all the different platforms, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So, with that, exactly everybody needs a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Will, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you the listeners are out there, if you can help us to share this expertise with even more startups and small businesses, you can just click share, subscribe, and leave us a review. Helps us to reach all the startups and small businesses out there to make sure that there's a success. And on that note, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Will, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.